first welcome everyone, and especially our guest speaker today, who is Sherry Deutschman, who founded a company called Letter Logic. I can't remember the year you founded it, Sherry. Was it like something like 2002? 2002. Oh, a whole 20 years ago. Oh yeah. My goodness. Wow. And you sold Letter Logic in
2016.
2016. So just before we did. So I am so excited, ladies, for you here to hear Sherry's story about the company that she built. And hopefully we'll get to a little bit of the work that she's doing now, in that she and I connected at SGF. Sherry is another amazing winning woman who I talk about all the time. And she and I connected this year at SGF in Palm Springs and got talking about the work that we were both doing, me with you guys and Sherry with ladies in Nashville. And Sherry reminded me of another crazy statistic. You know, I had been focused on only 2% of women are getting venture funding. And Sherry had been focused on only 2% of women are ever building businesses that do more than $1 million of revenue. And so you can imagine we had a lot to talk about when we got talking. And it was like, how do we help women? How do we do better at helping women cross some of these big thresholds, get funded, build big businesses, generate wealth, change the world? And so I was super excited when Sherry said yes, that she would come and share some of her pearls of wisdom with us today. And so I'm going to stop talking and let her start talking, and I'll let her tell us her story and some of the fascinating bits that she learned whilst she was growing her business that I know will be very relevant for all of you all. So over to you, Sherry.
Thank you, Sarah. Y'all, Sarah, we were both in the Ernst & Young Entrepreneurial Winning Women program, but we had never really spent a lot of time together. But everybody in SGF loves her, and they kept telling me, you and Sarah have got to talk. So it took us a few years, but we finally did it. I'm calling in from Nashville, Tennessee, USA. This is the country music capital of the world. And it's, you know, common that if you're at the grocery store, you can see rock stars and country music stars right there in the produce aisle. And at the movie theater, right next to you at a stoplight, they're everywhere. And so we get kind of used to it and don't pay a lot of attention, but it makes it pretty exciting if you come to visit. So I moved to this town thinking that I was going to be a star. I thought I was a singer. And there was a TV show back then called You Can Be a Star. Do y'all have American Idol and The Voice and things like that? So it was like that. And it was a singing contest. So I was on that show and I came in third place in a show that only had 3 contestants. So I came in last place and still thought that I was going to be a star. So I had just gone through a divorce. I was very young. I was 25 years old, moving myself and my daughter, who was 3 years old, to Nashville. Didn't know a soul. And what I was taking with me was nothing. I had only a high school education. I'd never even walked into a college or university. I had no money. I paid my first month's rent, and after that, to my name, I had less than $200. I had no skills. The only work I had ever done was scrubbing toilets. I had a route where I cleaned gas station bathrooms. And then there were the very wealthy people who lived on the mountain in my hometown. And I cleaned house for some of them. And I was a part-time receptionist for my dad's plumbing company. And that's how I made a living to support my daughter and me. I didn't have any worldly goods except I had a car that I paid $1 for, $1. And a lot of people say I got ripped off when I paid just $1 for that car. So this car had been used by my dad's construction company, and it had been parked too close to the side of a cliff on a mountain. And when the earth movers started moving the earth, this car had rolled off the mountain. And so it was dented and crushed in on all sides, but especially on the back left. And because we lived in a mountain town with lots of snow and salt, it had quickly rusted. So it was misshapen. There's no way I could have stalked anybody in my car back then, because you could see the shape of the car from a mile away and know who was coming, because it was so badly dented and misshaped.
You're
Yeah.
absolutely hilarious. You got me in stitches. You came third in a competition with 3 contestants, and then you described the car from hell for $1. Hilarious.
It was a car from hell. This is the thing. It had a really great stereo. And since I thought I was going to go to Nashville to be a star, having a great stereo was awesome. But right before I moved to Nashville, somebody broke into the car. Okay, that's not true. Why would you lock a car like that, right? So I did not have the door locked. They just got in and took my stereo and took the speakers. And somebody put in a lot of really great subwoofers and great speakers all over. So they're now on the interior of the car. There are big holes where all those things were. But I proudly drove her with my daughter in tow to move to Nashville, Tennessee, not knowing a soul, thinking I was going to be a star. I don't know if y'all have ever watched the TV show Nashville. It's centered around this little nightclub here called the Bluebird Cafe, which was a listening room for songwriters. And it had just opened, and you could go in there for free and just listen to Grammy Award-winning songwriters play their songs. And they would let me bring my daughter in. I couldn't afford a beverage or anything, but I could go in and just listen. So my daughter and I went there almost every night the first couple of weeks that I was here. And I realized that I did not have the goods to be a star. I mean, I was listening to one night Garth Brooks walked in. It was his first night playing there, and he just played a couple of songs. And I realized that I was not going to be a star, and I had to get a real job. So I went to a car dealership, a Lincoln Mercury dealership, because I had heard that they would hire you if you didn't have an education. They could teach you how to sell cars. You didn't have to have any experience. And this is really critical, they would give you a free brand new car to drive. They call it a demo. So you get a brand new, beautiful car to drive. And so I thought that was a pretty good idea. So I went straight down there to get a job, and the general manager met me out in the showroom. And he said, your timing is pretty good, because we've never had a woman in sales, and we think it's about time. So tell me, what do you know about cars? And I was like, yeah, not much. And he said, well, what do you drive? And I was like, oh my God. So I pointed out the showroom window to my car, and I wish you could have seen his face. And then he just was almost totally dismissive of me at that time. And he said, listen, this is a really tough business. There's tons of rejection. There's long hours. I mean, listen, young lady, can you handle rejection? And I just started laughing and said, oh yeah, I can handle rejection. And he said, why do you say that with such confidence? And I said, because I was raised as a Jehovah's Witness, knocking on doors since I was 8 years old. Well, he burst out laughing, and he said, okay, I'm going to give you a shot at this, but I want you to promise me one thing. I'm like, yes, sir. What is it? And he said, promise me you will never park that piece of shit car on this lot again. And so I said, yes, sir. And so you're supposed to sell 6 cars before you get your free demo. But a week into it, I had not sold anything. And he said, I can't take it anymore. Get rid of that car and pick yourself out a car from the show, from the lot. And so I did. And I had to pay $150 to get rid of that car. That's how bad she was. So that's why people say I got ripped off. And if I could buy her back right now, I would pay any amount of money to have her, and I would drive her all over this town, because I'm emotional about my coming to this town and getting a fresh start, not knowing anybody, and the endless possibilities that had opened for me. But he had told me that, you know, the car business is tough, the rejection, long hours, and it was very tough. There's a country song that says there's too much month at the end of the money. And that's kind of how it was for me. I just could not make ends meet. And so my daughter and I just had to make choices. So very often we did not have electricity because I couldn't afford the light bill and daycare bill. And so we just learned to live like that. And then eventually I would scrape up enough money to have the lights turned on. And then the next month the bill came around and they'd be shut off again. And so one day my mom and dad showed up to visit me. They couldn't call me because I did not have a phone. And it was before cell phones. I didn't have a landline, and they just showed up. They had driven the 6 hours and were just so upset that I didn't have electricity that day. It was a really hot summer day. And I was like, but you know, look, you can see right here's our cooler. We have milk, we have cheese, we've got the basics. You can see we're not starving to death. We are okay. And we usually were okay. But sometimes we weren't. So my daughter, I didn't have health insurance. I didn't have a credit card. You know, I didn't have enough money to make ends meet. And so my daughter had cut her foot on the playground, and I cleaned the wound as good as I could. And it started looking really bad. And every day it looked worse. And I just didn't know what to do. And eventually I took her to the emergency room. And I don't know how it works where you are, but here the emergency rooms have to take anybody. At most hospitals, they have to take anybody, whether you can pay or not. And so I took her there. And the physician told me that if I had waited even another day, my daughter could have lost her leg or her life, because she had a really serious staph infection in that wound. And so those hardships that I endured when I first came to Nashville, I think were really important in nurturing in me my deep empathy. So I have more than my share of empathy. When I die, the coroner's report is going to say death by empathy. But these hardships that I had when I first moved to Nashville, and not knowing anybody, not having any resources, kind of informed the leader that I would become later. And I just leaned into all of those experiences that I had when it came to how I was going to treat my employees. Okay, so I started doing something really stupid and started dating my boss. And so pretty soon we realized that one of us had to go, and it was me. So it was the best thing that could have happened to me, because it forced me out of my comfort zone. And I started selling, not cars, but, you know, medical goods and services. And that's where the Jehovah's Witness background was really great for me. So I'm sure y'all have had Jehovah's Witnesses knocking on your doors. Are any of you Jehovah's Witnesses? So, you know, you learn.
Sorry, Sherry, are you still Jehovah's Witness?
I'm not. When I left, when I moved to Nashville, I was no longer a witness. I was disfellowshipped right before I moved. And that's a whole nother very fascinating story. So when you've got time for that. But, you know, I learned to deal with rejection and just talk to anybody, whether it was the wealthy people or, you know, the people there are a lot of people in Eastern North Carolina who still do not have indoor plumbing. And so we learned to talk to everybody. So I started out in sales and started doing well and making real money and having enough money to, you know, buy my own car, to buy a house, to have real vacations. And eventually got to where I was making, you know, more than $100,000 a year. And I was working for this company that printed and mailed hospital bills. And I was responsible for 100% of the revenue that came in the door. I sold everything, every penny that they brought in. I'm the one who sold those contracts. Well, we were acquired. And after we were acquired, we just started falling apart. The customer service just was abysmal. And so I would sell a new account and we would lose 2 accounts. I would go sell a new account and we would lose 2 accounts. Well, I was on a straight commission basis. And all of those people that I was selling to had become my friends. And I was disappointing my friends every day. And I was seeing my income go down every month. And so I kept trying to figure out, why we were making the silly mistakes that we were making that was causing us to lose customers. And I realized that it was all, just carelessness, really, simple human error. And so I read this book called Nuts, and it's about how this man started Southwest Airlines. His name is Herb Kelleher. He started Southwest Airlines with the idea that if he took great care of the staff, they would take great care of the customer, and he could build a profitable company. Well, Southwest Airlines has had some problems this past year, but until this year, it's always been one of the most profitable airlines in history. And that really resonated with me. So I ran to my boss to say, hey, I think I've got this thing figured out. We have all this trouble with the carelessness on the floor, but I think the problem is they're careless because they don't believe anybody cares about them. And I think that if we followed this example and took better care of them, that when they were at work, they would care more and we would not have the careless mistakes. And my boss, instead of saying, gosh, thank you for caring so much about our company, thank you for thinking about this, instead, he just patted my hand and he said, you don't know anything about business. Why don't you just go sell something? And so I cried. I was really hurt and angry, but I took his advice and I just went out and sold something. Except this time it wasn't for his company, it was for my company. I was so angry that I decided I'm going to leave you and I'm going to start my own company competing with you. Okay, so like the problem is though, I had never even read a business plan, much less written one. But I figured I couldn't do worse than him. He had an MBA from Vanderbilt, but I thought he had no common sense. And so I just went and got all the books that I could about how to write a business plan. And I wrote my business plan. And then I took it to people around Nashville to say, I'm going to start this company competing with him and I need $350,000. Well, y'all, the crazy thing is that everybody I went to said yes. They all said they would give me the $350,000. But none of them would let me do what I wanted to do with that $350,000. And so I said no to all of them. I said, I don't need your money. I'm going to do it myself. And so I had a week-long yard sale. Do y'all have yard sales in South Africa? Well,
No, not really.
Well, here you literally put up tables in your lawn and you bring out everything you own and you put it out there and people flock and buy everything and you won't believe what people will buy. So I sold everything I owned and I cashed in my 401k, which is our retirement money. And I just started the company in my basement, right next to my washer and dryer. And I didn't have any furniture left because I'd sold it all. So I had to go to Goodwill, which is a thrift store. And I bought 2 little used filing cabinets, the little short file cabinets. And that was the base for my desk. And I got an old door and pulled that over the file cabinets, and that became my desk. And I had a whiteboard. And by this time I had a telephone and I just started calling customers. And the company that I was working for sued me for violation of my non-compete. I countersued them because they hadn't paid me. And so we worked out a deal. And I just started calling hospitals and saying, I want your business. And I don't believe the customer comes first. And they would look like, what? You want me to be your customer, but you're telling me I don't come first? And I said, no, I have a different kind of company. I have a company that puts the employees first. And I told them, this is what I do for my employees. And so from the very day I opened my company, Letter Logic, I had incredible benefits. because I believed so fervently in what I had read, that if you take really good care of the employees, that they will take great care of the customer, and then the customer would take great care of me, the shareholder. So from the day I opened the door, I had real fair living wage. I had health insurance for them and their families. So I paid for 100% of their medical, dental, disability, and life insurance. And then I thought back about the pride that I had when I bought my first home. And so I had a program where I would help every employee buy a house by giving them the money for the down payment or the closing costs of their first house. And then thinking back to what it had been like when I was a single mom, I made it so you could bring your kids to work anytime you wanted to. So in the US, if your kid has a runny nose, it might be allergies, it might be a cold, but if they have a runny nose, they can't go to daycare and they can't go to first grade. So you can't go to work because you got to stay home and take care of the baby. So you're not making any money that day. And it's a ridiculous, vicious cycle. So I said, on those days, bring your kids to work, I will take care of them. And then if it's a snow day, which we have snow and ice here in Nashville occasionally, bring them all to work. I will babysit while y'all work. And then we had a program where if they wanted to bike or walk to work, or they wanted to take the bus to work, if you walked or biked, we paid you by the mile. But if you wanted to take a bus, we paid for it. So we just created a culture where everybody felt cared for, and they were really making enough money to pay their bills, so they didn't have to worry about the lights being turned off. And it worked. So I would tell the customers, I don't believe the customer comes first. I believe that my employees come first. And y'all, I just said y'all again, sorry about that. They just nodded and said, oh my gosh, where do we sign? It was ridiculous how it resonated with the customer. And even very prestigious hospitals here across the nation, the people around the table when I was doing the sales pitch would say, we want to come to work for you. And it was just amazing. So we grew to be the most expensive in the nation. Had no debt, because when I started out, I would try to get a loan to buy a piece of equipment or to get a lease, and none of the banks would loan me any money, and nobody would give me a lease. They said I wasn't bankable. And so I hired a man who could fix anything. We called him MacGyver. I don't know if you've seen that show, but he could fix anything. And I hired him. And ironically, his last name was Prophet, Paul Prophet. And we loved our Paul Prophet. So I would buy these beaten down old used machines, and Paul could make them run like a Swiss watch. So we just grew and grew. And if you talked to any of those employees today, if you asked them about which one of those benefits they liked best, they wouldn't mention anything I just told you about. They would tell you about 3 other things that I think were the most impactful things we did. And that's what I really want to share with you today. And the first of those was just listening to the employees, just spending time listening to them. And I did that in multiple ways. I just remember what it was like for me to be an employee and my boss not to listen to me, and how little he made me feel, and how devalued. And so if I went to get myself a cup of coffee, I got 2 cups of coffee, and I took it to a different person out on the factory floor. And we would just stand there next to their machine and just talk, and I would listen and learn about their kids. But the most important listening I did was on Wednesdays. So every other day of the week, I was Sherry, the CEO, but on Wednesdays, I was Lucy. And I would invite any of the employees to have lunch with Lucy, and they could choose the restaurant, and they could choose who else would go with us to lunch, and they would choose the topic of conversation. So sometimes often they wanted me to meet their husband or wife or who they were dating, and that's who would go with us to lunch. Sometimes it was a whole department that wanted to gang up on me about something. Sometimes it was at 2 different times, it was young men who said, I'm getting ready to pop the question. Can you help me pick out her ring? And so it was just a great time for me to get to know them. And so when they chose the restaurant, they would often choose restaurants in their neighborhoods. So I got to see a little bit more about their lives. And then I just learned all about their lives at this lunch. I learned about, what their hopes and dreams were. And not a single one of them had wanted to grow up and work for a company that printed hospital bills. They all had real hopes and dreams. And so we talked about what it was going to take to get them on that path. And they told me what they thought I was doing wrong and what they thought I was doing right. They told me about their struggles they were having at home. And so I learned, some horrendous things that were happening to them at home before they left work, or what the kind of homes they went to at night. And it gave me, a lot more empathy for how they showed up at work. There's, one woman in particular that was late for work every day. And no matter what I did, I could not get her to be on time. But I found out she was single. She had to drop her kids off at 2 different daycare centers. And one, she couldn't drop her off until like 9 a.m., which means she could not be to work until 9:15 or 9:20. I wouldn't have known that, except I had lunch with her and found out and realized I had to give her grace on that. I also learned about things that were going wrong in the company that I had no idea were going on. I learned about equipment that wasn't working properly. I learned about bottlenecks that were causing problems. And I just listened. And it was the most important time I spent in my company every week, because they were doing jobs that I didn't know how to do. There's no way I could have done most of their jobs. And so to hear from them firsthand what they needed from me was invaluable. And so that's what I have a book out, and it's called Lunch with Lucy. And Lucy, they still call me Lucy. So, I sold the company now 7 years ago, and they will text me and say, hey, Lucy, you want to have a beer tonight? Or Lucy, it's just constant Lucy invitations and connections. So the number 1 was just listening. And number 2 was transparency. And we were transparent in a number of ways. One was when I went to lunch with them and heard about, what was going on in the company, I would go back and tell the leadership team what was going on and say, we've got to buy a new piece of equipment because that one's not working. And we published the minutes to our leadership meetings for the whole company to read. And so if they had told me about a piece of equipment that was causing problems, they knew I listened because they could read the minutes and see it was right there, that I had lunch with them and I came right back and told leadership, we've got to do something about this or that. So if we were talking about a particular employee, of course, we didn't write that in the minutes, but everything else, it was right there. And then once a month, I brought all the employees together in one room. And the room kept getting bigger and bigger every year as we grew. But I gave them the profit and loss statement from the previous month and total transparency into how much money we were making. So they could see on months where we did everything right, they could see, wow, here's the top line, but look at that bottom line. We are making money. And they could see it And on the months where we didn't do so well, we just talked about it. Profit wasn't very great this month because remember that big job we messed up from California? That cost us $30,000. And we didn't point fingers and say, so-and-so screwed up. We just talked about the problem in general and what we were going to do to prevent that from happening again. And they could start drawing a direct line between their actions and their inactions to that bottom line, to the profit. So the transparency was critical in them understanding why we were asking them to do certain things and what our costs were. And so you might say, well, why should they care how much money you made? You were the shareholder. Because every month at that meeting, we took that bottom line, whatever it was, whether it was $50,000 or $500,000, whatever it was, I took 10% of that bottom line and I split it evenly with all of them. So that third thing, so first it was, listening, and second, transparency. The third was a profit share plan, which was the most brilliant idea I ever had in my life. It was transformational. And every company that has tried it has gone, oh my gosh, this changes everything. Because I would take that 10%, divide it evenly between however many employees we had. And this is important. It meant that the janitor, the custodian, got exactly the same thing our chief financial officer got. And that told our janitor he was just as important as our CFO was. And no more important, that everybody had a fair share in the bottom line. And so, y'all, it just made everybody work together much more closely. It made them have more respect for one another. It made them help if somebody had to be out for some reason. It made everybody else jump in to fill the gap without resentment, because they knew if they were out, that person was going to jump in for them. It made them make better decisions. So I'll give you an example of that. Our profit first starting out was like a fraction of a cent. So we sold our items, these hospital bill packages, for like 60 cents. And we were at first making just like a quarter cent a piece profit. And then it got to half a cent a profit, and then penny. And then at the end, it was like more than a nickel a piece profit. But the envelopes that we put these things in cost a penny and a half. But if a couple of them fell on the floor, nobody would pick them up. They would just tromp on them, and they were ruined and you couldn't do anything with it. When I shared with them the financials and said, our whole profit on all the work we do, our profit is a penny and a half. And that envelope cost a penny and a half. So when that thing of envelopes just got stomped on, we just blew our profit for all those bills we just printed. We're not making any money on those because those envelopes had to be thrown away. So it just made them think differently and behave differently. And that's what drove the profit from, a quarter cent at first to more than a nickel a piece profit. And when you're doing, at the end, we were doing 450,000 a day. So those nickels in profit really add up. And we just became a little money-making machine because everybody was working together so closely. So the very first profit share check I wrote was $7. And you think, what in the world can you do with $7? They celebrated like I had just given them a new car. And then it grew and grew and grew. So $70 and then $700 and then $1,000. Everybody getting $1,000 every month. It was magical in the way it made them work together and respect and appreciate each other. And it's, what enabled us to continue to grow, to be the most expensive, And, we would tell clients, prospective clients, you need to know that we're the most expensive. So if you're really price sensitive, don't waste your time talking to us. And psychologically, that did something that where they want to go, like, of course we can afford you. And they would just, want to be at the table. And then when we shared all of those features and benefits, they could just see how it would affect them. One of the most gratifying was Stanford University Medical Center, which is a very prestigious healthcare system, wrote us a letter and said, you were 10% higher than the next highest bid. And we chose you because we believe in the culture you created. And so, 10% higher is significant. And to them, it was like $500,000 a year more, and they still chose us because of the culture. Our sales team said that 85% of the sales they made were what they called culture sales. They chose us because they believed in the culture of putting the employees first. And, interestingly, I think the most gratifying thing that happened when I was selling the company came after I sold the company. So every month, everybody got that profit share. And I should say it was critical that it was monthly, because like most companies in corporate America, at least, if they have a profit share, they do it annually. They do it based on your salary, a percentage of your salary. But instead, when we did it monthly and we could talk about the results from the previous month, then they could connect the dots. It was the more immediate reward was really good for everybody. The fact that we did it with a paper check was important, but the fact that it was even was critical. You see, everybody is already getting different salaries based on their education. There's already that delineation. And at the end of the day, they had already been paid more than, the CFO was already paid more than the person who was answering the phone. And there was no reason to continue that stratification going down. I hired a CFO once who, when he came into the company, he said, I love this culture. This is great. I love it. Well, about 6 weeks into it, he pulled me aside and he said, you're a little naive about this profit sharing thing. And I said, really? He said, yeah, that's not really how it's supposed to be done. And I said, well, explain it to me. And so he explained it. And I was like, oh my gosh, you mean that because Frank P. LeVar, the receptionist, because you make 5 times more salary than him, you should also get 5 times the profit that he gets. And he said, yeah, that's right. You've got it. And I said, and you're fired, because you will never be more important to me than Frank P. LeVar. And he had pretended, I fired him because he had pretended to buy into the culture that we were all equally valuable, but he didn't really believe it. He believed that he was more valuable. So he lost his job. And that culture of caring really infected the rest of the team. So after I sold the company, when I sold the company, I sold it I told the employees on a Monday, crying, that I had sold the company. And the following Monday was my last day with them. And so for that last week, I met with each of them individually and said, if I gave you $10,000 today, what would you do with it? And so each of them told me what they would do. One of the guys said, I'm going to break up with my girlfriend and I'm buying a boat. So I heard all kinds of, things they were going to do, buy a new roof, pay off student loans. But then after they told me what they were going to do with it, then I would say, well, here's 70,000. So you'll have a little left over, or here's 35,000, or here's 750,000. So I gave them 15% of the sale of the company. This time I couldn't do it I couldn't do it evenly, because some people have been with us 6 months and some people have been with me the entire 14 years. So I did it based on tenure. And so from 30,000 to 750,000 is what people got. So after I sold the company, a young woman, 26 years old, called Lucy for lunch. And she said, I want to take Lucy to lunch and I want to tell you what I did with my money. So 26-year-old woman, what do you think she would do with her money? She paid off her parents' mortgage. Her parents had been Serbian refugees, and she had overheard them talking about, they had 17 relatives living in one apartment in Serbia, and they were sending all the money they could, but it was their house mortgage that was standing in the way of them giving more. And so she told her parents, I'm paying off the mortgage. And they said, no, you can't do that. And she said, yes, I'm doing it. And she said she had to tell me about it because it was the empathy that we nurtured within the company that made her think that way. And she said, before I came to work here, it would never have occurred to me to look to see what my parents needed and how I might help them. But this company, Letter Logic, made me more empathetic. And I think that was, the proudest moment I've ever had in business. It's just hard to imagine, isn't it? And you can imagine how her parents felt for a 26-year-old woman to pay off their mortgage. So I think she had gotten around $35,000 as her gift, or maybe more than that, but at least $35,000. But she had saved every one of her profit share checks. She just put that all in one account, and that's the money that she used to pay off their mortgage. And I think, women are born with more empathy than men. Although scientists aren't sure exactly why that is true, but I do believe that empathy can be nurtured, and especially when people are shown empathy and when they witness the power of empathy, they become more empathetic. And so that empathy was my trait that I used to build that company to $40 million a year. $40 million a year with no debt. So when I sold it, I didn't know a single penny to anybody. And that was really awesome. And to be able to share the money the way we did. And I believe that, yeah, the benefits were good. The insurance and helping people buy their first home was good. But what they really cared about was having a voice and being heard and being valued and being treated like they mattered, because they did matter. I loved them and they loved me, and we still have a close relationship all these years later. So yeah, it was a very unorthodox approach to business, but it works. A couple of years ago, my dad died the same year I sold the company, and he left behind his company, utility construction company, to my mother. And I told her then, I'm free and I can come run it for you. And, she's very, well, women just really don't have much credibility in that world. So instead, she asked my brother to run it for her. And so 3 years later, she called and said, we're losing money terribly, and I'm having to step in and make payroll for them. And I'm having to loan the company money to make the payroll. And so can you come and help us? And I said, and by then, so with Jehovah's Witnesses, I was excommunicated. And so my family was not supposed to speak to me. And so I had not talked to my brother in 20 years, but he read my book, and my mother read my book. And that's why they said, can you help us? And I said, yes, but I have an unorthodox way of doing things and you have to agree to it. And they said, okay. And I said, we're going to raise everybody's wages because you're not paying them enough to pay attention, much less to care about what's going on here. They don't have health insurance. So we're going to provide health insurance and we're going to give them a share of the profit. It was hilarious because my mom says, well, we're not making any profit, so that's not going to be hard. And I'm like, well, there's a reason for that. So that's all I did. I empowered a person there to be in charge. He had been my dad's right-hand man for years, put in these benefits, put in the profit share plan. Their business is a little different, so they get the profit share quarterly instead of monthly. That company has increased profitability 4,110% in just 2 years. And when I came in to do it, we had a valuation done of the business, and the broker said, it's not worth anything. It's only worth auction what you can get for the equipment. So now we are getting 4 times. So it's on the market. I'm actually under contract right now, selling the company, and we're getting 4 times earnings, and the company's doing really well. And I believe that the cultural shift of having those monthly meetings and sharing the profits with them meant everything. And across the nation, people have read my book and then called me to say, okay, can we hire you to come in and do this for us? I'm like, no, read the book. It is so simple. A first grader understands what 10% is. And so just do it. This is easy. And those who have followed it, I get calls and stories from them saying it was transformational. It was a game changer. And I think it works in any type of business, but I think it's especially effective in, service-based businesses where the salaries might be typically lower. But I've seen it be really effective, where the most common question is, if they see how much money I'm making, they're going to resent me only giving them 10%. I'm like, no, you're wrong. They think you're making way more money than you're making. They don't understand all the costs that are going into doing what you do. They have no idea that you're having to pay for all these different insurances. They don't know how much the rent is. And trust me, they think you're making a lot more money than you're making. And almost always that is the case. The employees say, oh, I thought you were just killing it. And realize, no, we're rarely making it. So that's my story. And, I'm so grateful for y'all listening, and I'll answer any questions you've got.
Thank you, Sherry. You are truly extraordinary, and as humble as a woman you are. You became a very wealthy woman because you put your people first, and because you built a culture of putting people first that meant they cared. They cared about your business, and therefore they cared about the customer, which is a truly, truly inspiring leadership story. Thank you so much for sharing it. Let's open the floor. Sasha, you've got a question.
Sherry, thank you so much. You had me in tears. A beautiful, beautiful story, and something I definitely kind of emphasize with on how to run a business. 2 questions. You said you shared the profit, the 10%. Did you tell the team that it was 10% of the profit? You said you were transparent. So were you transparent in how the percentage of the profits? And did you also do the same to your commission earners? Because obviously commission earners, they can earn as much as they want. And I know obviously CFOs versus the janitor, I get that story, but commission earners, did you pay the same?
Yes. So first, let me address the 10% part. So we had a big screen out in the factory, which is where we had our lunch meetings. And on the screen, we had the P&L. So we zoomed in on what the top line was, what the gross revenue was, and then zoomed in on the bottom line, what the net profit was, and then took 10%. And they knew it was 10%, and they knew that the other 90% was plowed right back into the company. And that's why we didn't have any debt. We just paid cash for whatever we got, and they understood that, and they did not resent it. I did it 10% because I thought even almost anybody can understand what 10% is. There's no smoke and mirrors. There's no formula. it's just easy to understand. And I wanted to make sure that everybody there, even those like me who only had a high school education, could understand exactly what they were getting and why. And yes, even the salespeople who were commission people got the same share. And I think that was critical. So a lot of people, this is a common question I get. So a lot of people say, yes, you know, they're already making more money than everybody else. They shouldn't get a percentage of the profit. I think they're the ones who drive the profit. And even though they were the highest paid people in the company, they took pride in sharing that and having that same profit share. And what was interesting, it's the first company I've seen where the rest of the employees did not resent the salespeople. I made a mistake. The New York Times wrote an article about my company. And in that article, I wrote that our sales guys made twice the money that I made. And one of them came to me so upset, and he said, I wish that you wouldn't talk about how much money I'm making, because those are my friends that work out there on the factory floor. And they, you know, they make a lot less money than I do. And that just was so hurtful. And I was like, I'm sorry, but I've got to tell you, Kenan, those guys love how much money you're making, because the more money you make, they know the more money they make, and they do not resent you. And I've never seen that before. And he acknowledged that, you know, you're right. They, you know, they applaud every time I make a new sale. And so I made sure that they're just like everybody else. But what I did do differently with them, I shared the costs with everybody, but with the sales team, they wanted more granular numbers. And so I let them come into my office, pull up a chair right next to me, and we used NetSuite software for our accounting software. And I would say, here, have at it. You can pull up any report you want. You can print anything you want. I want you to see to the minute detail, the fraction of a penny on what we spend on everything. And that informed them on exactly what they needed to sell and at what price. And that's part of the things that drove that profit line, because they understood exactly what our costs were. And so that level of transparency, that was open to everybody, but nobody really cared except the sales team.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Michelle, single L.
Yes, hi, Sherry. I've really enjoyed your story, and I really like your very unique combination of being as tough as nails, but yet so empathic. I think it's very unique. There are plenty of people who are tough as nails, and we have a lot of empathic people, but to find them in the same person is really refreshing. It's lovely, lovely to see. What I wanted to ask was, this approach that you have, you did it right from the get-go. When your business opened, before you'd even turned a sale or signed a contract, that was what you decided to do.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Now, how did you do that? Because it's being a person who started a business and bootstrapped it myself, it's very difficult to say I'm going to pay industry competitive wages or above. I'm going to give health insurance. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. I'm going to do that. And I'm going to share profit, which I haven't yet made. How did you get started with that?
Great question. So, you know, when I started out, I thought I needed $350,000, and I was wrong. I was going to need more than that. But when I sold all my belongings, trust me, I did not come up with $350,000. So I still had this, you know, a big gap. And so every customer, I asked them to prepay a 1-month deposit. So if they were going to do $30,000 a month with me, I asked them to do a $30,000 deposit, and nobody said no. And so later, and part of that was because I was mailing their bills for them, and they understood that the post office didn't extend credit. And so I just said, this is a postage deposit. I'm going to bill you at the end of 30 days. And you're going to take 30 days to pay me. So I'm just asking you to prepay me that first month, so I'm not paying your postage for you. And after the first year and a half, I thought, well, they're paying me at the end of 30 days. I mean, I'm billing them at the end of 30 days and they're paying 30 days. I should get a 2-month deposit. And I was a little afraid, but I went back to all of those original customers and said, hey, I'm, because of the way you pay, I need you to give a 60-day deposit. And they did.
Mhm.
So the customers financed my company.
Wonderful.
And I want to address the other thing you said about being tough. I did a test yesterday called the Culture Index, and it said that I was highly empathic, but also real high on the logic side. And I remember Harvey was our janitor, and he was my closest friend there. He's who I had lunch with most often. He's the one that was not afraid of me and would call me to task if he thought I'd said or done something wrong. And he was always telling people, don't be fooled. Don't be fooled. She's tough as nails, but she is fair. And so I like when you said tough as nails, that's exactly what he always would say, but you're fair. And they also knew that I was very loving, but I had to be tough.
Yes. Well, we can see that you've had to be tough right from the beginning,
Yes.
but you've certainly managed to temper it with that empathy.
Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you.
I think that empathy is my superpower, and it is to the extreme. I write in my book, and then my husband just laughs at me. Football is our big sport here, and I'm always rooting for a particular team. And then every game I cry for the losers, because I think, oh my gosh, they've got families that are home rooting for them right now. And last week, the last time, but we were deciding who's going to play the Super Bowl this week, I was crying like a baby because of these people who lost, and thinking that their wives and children are wanting them to win the game, and they didn't, and somebody has to lose. But yes.
There was a question in the chat from Claudia, who's asking, and this is going to be my question too, actually, what happened to the employees once you sold the company? Did the new owners of the company keep your same culture?
So I chose them. We had 7 companies vying to buy us, and I chose the company that I chose, well, partly because it was an all-cash deal and it was a really good deal, but also because they pretended to buy into the culture part. But the first day that they owned us, they did away with the profit share. And it was because it was a private equity firm that was going to roll us in with other companies like us. And I was very naive. I didn't really understand how private equity worked then, and that the goal of private equity is not to build a great company. It's just to provide a great return for the shareholders. And so they glommed together several companies in our industry, which helped them get a much higher multiple, and getting rid of the profit share would help them get there quicker. So they lost 60% of the sales force in the first 90 days. And the only people they retained were about half of people at the top of that food chain. And some of them are still there, including my nephew, who's making a killing, because every time they're now a $2 billion company. And every time they, roll up, he makes a little bit more money. But it was very sad. I just very sad to see the way the culture changed, but also heartening to see how it resonated with the employees enough that they said, I'm not staying here.
Michelle, double L, and I'll come back to you, Sasha.
So this is so timely. I don't even know if that's the right word, because of Afrikaans, but so in this last week, I've had to address with my team, and we're a very small team, and our team is very young. Almost all of them come from like a disadvantaged background. And I had to address with them that you can't not be there on a Monday, because I just rocked up at work and I was the only one there. And so it was really, really interesting. And for the first time ever, I actually showed them that every Monday that they weren't there, that our numbers would drop in retention. And it was so interesting to see that they've made the link. I don't know how they feel about it yet because it was in this week. So we'll see how that goes. But it's really, really interesting. And I love this like 10% thing, because if they could see the connection between just the retention numbers, then surely they'll work together to get the profits. So long story short, to ask a simple question, do you think there is more? I think listening is maybe something that I should just find out, like why is Mondays always an issue? But if you have any advice, like what do you think is happening there? Or is it just kind of like what you said, just make them more aware of how their actions are impacting? Because we're in a very fragile stage where if one person doesn't rock up and one person does do their job, 6 people are paused and we don't get that income for that day.
So it's funny, this topic came up last night. I'm in an organization called the Entrepreneurs Organization, and I was with 7 other business owners last night, and we talked about this very thing. And one of the members said, I went into work and I was the only one there. The reception desk is empty. And she said, the only person who was working was my virtual assistant who's in the Philippines. And but nobody was there. And so I have a need from a client and I can't walk down the hall and get it taken care of. And so we talked about how, the laxness, and that, she had allowed it. And so, she was going to have to rein it back in. In the States, a lot of companies were allowing, a lot of companies still do allow remote work, but they're starting to change that because it is affecting profitability in some ways. I think the transparency will really help. In my mom's company, there's one man who is calling out a lot. And so my recommendation, there is that we put in a new thing that you can only miss so many days. If you miss enough, you're not in the profit share that month.
Got you.
And so, it's a little more difficult to build the model. So to qualify for the profit share, you have to have, 95% attendance or whatever you want to do. But
that's
I think,
actually a really good point.
Yeah.
One more question.
Okay.
Have you met Brandy Carlisle?
I'm 1 degree of separation from Brandy Carlisle. I love her.
I love her.
Yeah. So one of the other winning women with us, Fran and Naomi, who have a company in Seattle, they're really close friends with her. And
that's the next speaker. I'm just saying.
Yeah. Hey, Fran, who will be a fantastic speaker for this group. Oh my gosh.
I think didn't we have Fran, ladies?
She won.
Fran has the unisex underwear. I think about last year or something.
Yes,
we did.
yes, we did.
She's friends with Brandy Carlisle, like traveling together friends. Yeah, I love her.
LinkedIn friends with Fran. She's going to hear from me today.
Sasha, let's go back to you. You've got another question.
Sorry, Sherry, me again. So I think it's a bit about what Michelle was saying. What do you do with non-performers? So obviously you're fair, but you're empathetic. So obviously you find out what the reason is, but you fired the CFO because he didn't really believe in the culture. But what did you do with non-performers?
It kind of took care of itself. One of the most telling situations was I was interviewing. So the way our company was, you would walk in the front door, you go up a flight of stairs into the lobby, and behind the lobby was the conference room, which was all glassed in. So you could see who was in the conference room. And one of the workers came in one morning and he saw me in the conference room with a man who was describing himself to me as that guy's best friend. And he was applying for a job. And so, Michael stared at us for a minute and then went on through. And after the interview, I was walking through and he came over to me and said, "What were you doing with that guy in the conference room?" And I said, that guy, your best friend? And he said, yes, he is my best friend. What's he doing here? And I said, he was applying for a job. And he said, do not hire him. And I was like, why? And he said, because he parties too hard on Sundays. If he comes in at all on Mondays, he's going to be late. He's going to be hungover. And there's no way I'm going to share the profit with that guy. And so when we hired new people, everybody jumped in to get them up to speed as quickly as possible, because you want them, if they're going to get a profit, a piece of that profit, you want them pulling their weight. And so pretty quickly you could see if somebody was going to contribute fully or not. And then the team would kind of say, he's not going to cut it. And so we would all jump in to try to help that person get up to speed. And then you could see personality traits that were going to prevent them from really earning that fair profit share. So.
Thanks, Sherry.
And I think that some of the biggest mistakes I made along the way were holding on to some people for too long. My empathy, I would start thinking, well, they've got a family to feed and they've got bills to pay. They've got a mortgage. And then I just had to realize that they needed to care about their families as much as I cared about their family. And I didn't have one family to take care of. I had 55 families to take care of.
I was going to ask you, is that how many people were working for Letter Logic when you sold it? Were there 55 employees?
There were 52 when I sold it. So
Okay.
we'd been up to, up and down. We'd had about 65 at one point because we were building out a tech component.
And do you think this works regardless of how many employees there are? Do you think this works if there's 5 people in the company or 500 people in the company in terms of your profit sharing idea?
I absolutely do. So I've got a new company now, and there are just 3 of us, although I'm trying to hire, and we aren't profitable yet. I think we'll have our first, I think this month will be our first, at least break even month. But I do share the financials with them wide open. They get to see the whole thing. And so that makes they make better decisions. And so if you're thinking we're right on the cusp of breaking even, and if we're going to spend $2,000 on something, it better translate into something to the bottom line. That's how they're thinking. They think differently because of it.
Yeah, I think it's super powerful. Going on to your new company, with the 3 of you, BrainTrust, you are working on helping women in the Nashville area, and you're trying to expand your reach to help women cross the magic threshold of being a company that can do more than $1 million of revenue. Lots of these ladies here today are on that same kind of journey. We've seed invested them and they're trying to grow their revenue to $1 million plus. A couple have made it already, and everyone is on that journey. But what do you think the secrets are? Or maybe 1 or 2 sort of nuggets of gold that you would share with us that are critical for closing that gap and hitting the $1 million threshold?
Thinking bigger. And it really comes down to a simple math problem. So, with quite a few now in Nashville, we have 17 groups of women, and we've got 4 more starting, and they meet once a month and they help each other through these problems. So the ones at the lower end, it was just a matter of them taking $1 million and dividing it by the number of items or hours of service they had to sell, and realizing how much they had to do to get to $1 million. And then reworking their business plan on how to get there. So it was really about the model and a mindset. In the US, women get less than 2% of the investment dollars too. And I believe a lot of that is societal, and a lot of it is our fault. And that's not a popular thing to say, but I think that I think it's the truth. We're not asking for enough money. We're not asking often enough. And oftentimes we are not building scalable companies. And so it's going to be hard to get an investor. So it's just like taking your blinders off about, can this company really make money? Is it really investable? And there's nothing wrong. A lot of organizations like ours won't support what they call lifestyle businesses or companies that can't scale. But I do fully, because a lifestyle business can take a woman and create, end generational poverty for her family and start creating generational wealth. And so every company doesn't have to be a unicorn, and every company doesn't have to be $100 million or $1 billion company. If you can do $250,000 a year for many people, that is a good business.
Maybe tell the ladies just a little bit how BrainTrust works, and how critical you think being accountable to each other is.
So the way BrainTrust works is we put the women in groups of 7, and we put them in a group for how different they are from one another. So I don't take into consideration, are they going to like each other, or what will they have in common? I prefer that they don't have much in common, except for their trying to grow a business, because the diversity of the backgrounds, the ages, the education, the type of industries, the greater the diversity around that table, the greater and the richer the experiences they're going to bring to the table, and the greater the opportunity they have to see blind spots that you can't see, and the greater the opportunity for them to know what you don't know. And that's most of our problem in it. We don't know what we don't know till it's too late. Mm-hmm. But with these 6 other women, one of them knows something you don't know. So the way it works is once a month you get together for 4 hours. And that's the hardest part, taking 4 hours out of your work month. And then each woman gives an update on the 3 biggest things she's dealing with in her life, whether it's a personal problem or a professional problem, or the 3 greatest opportunities in front of her. And each woman takes about 7 minutes to give that update. And it's timed, so one woman can't hog the whole show. And then the group decides which of the problems they're going to tackle that day. And once you decide that you're going to tackle a problem, you ask the woman, take 10 minutes and tell us everything we need to know about this problem you're experiencing or this opportunity that's in front of you. So she shares all that, and then they ask her questions to make sure they understand the real problem and not just the symptoms of the problem. And they have to be really careful not to ask questions like, well, have you ever thought about doing it this way? Because that's really giving them advice, and we do not give advice. And then after all the questions are asked, then one by one, the women can share their experiences related to a particular problem. I was part of the Entrepreneurs Organization for many years and dropped out when Letter Logic was at about 30 million in revenue, because I thought, I don't need it, I'm too busy. And when I was going through the sale of my company, as the offers were coming in, so we're at a very critical time in the company, I was betrayed by my most beloved, most valuable employee in a way that could have crashed the whole deal. And I was driving to an event when I found out, and I don't even know how I got to the event. Have you ever done that, where you drive somewhere and you don't know how you got there? So I was at this event, and Ryan Gosling, who I love, could have been on the stage naked, and I would not have known, because I was so upset. But I realized that I shouldn't be there, that I had to get to the office and solve this problem. And so I whispered to my banker who had invited me to this event and said, I've got to leave, I've got a crisis. And I whispered to the man on my right, who happened to be also an EO member, and told him what was going on. And he was like, oh my gosh. And he said, call your EO group. And I said, well, I don't have one. I dropped out like a year ago. And he said, well, that was stupid. Hold on a minute. And he started texting, and he told his group to go to my house. So 30 minutes later, his group, which was 7 of the most powerful entrepreneurs in Nashville, were at my house. They all dropped what they were doing and said, tell us what's going on. I told them, I used the same process. This is what's going on. They asked questions, and then they shared their experiences. okay, none of them had exactly this thing happen to them, but all of them had a time where they had an existential crisis, and all of them had a time when they had been betrayed by somebody, a spouse or whatever. And so they all shared those stories with me, and I knew what I had to do. I had to fire this beloved employee that day, and I had to rejoin EO because I never wanted to not have that tribe around me again. And so I rejoined, and I started this thing for women to help them get to the $1 million mark, because you have to be at $1 million in revenue before you can join EO, and you have to own at least 50% of your business. And it's been transformational for these women. The support, the goals. So you report your goals every month, and each one of them comes to the meeting reporting her revenue from the previous month. So you can't BS your way through life and have the other women think you are somewhere where you're not. And my point is, I can't help you get somewhere if I don't know what your starting point is. So every month they come in and they report their revenue to each other, not to me. And so they're very transparent. And then they just help one another and hold each other accountable to the goals they have to help them get to the next level. And it's working. Most of them have put in financial penalties. So if you are late, you have to pay for being late to the meeting. If you miss a meeting, you're only allowed one miss a year. But then if you miss your goals, you pay $20 a fine or $100 a goal, whatever that each group decides, for not making your goals. So you take the goals pretty seriously.
You are extraordinary, my friend. Does anyone else have any questions for Sherry? We probably got time for one more question, and then we must wrap up.
I do, but I don't want to take the floor in case somebody else wants it.
Okay, we get 10 seconds here for someone else's hand to go up, otherwise Sasha's getting it.
Go for it, Sasha.
It's yours.
Sherry, do you allow people to join the BrainTrust that aren't in the US?
So we've had a virtual group before. It's really hard, but I'm happy to lead a virtual group if y'all have enough people to do it.
We've been talking about it, Sherry, haven't we? We've been talking about, could we set one up? Could something like that work here? Could we make that happen potentially?
I think you can, and it's got to be going in raw and naked and just being honest with each other and holding each other accountable, and with kindness, holding people accountable to what they say they're going to do, and calling people out when they're exhibiting bad behavior or just, not keeping commitments. But the process works. One of the best stories so far is 14 months ago, a man came to me and said, will you talk to my daughter? I did. She was living on food stamps. I don't know if y'all know what that is, but here, the government is subsidizing her food. She was a single mom, 3 kids, making $20 an hour, which does not get it in the US. And so he asked me to help her, and I listened to what she did and gave her some advice, which generally we don't do. She's doing $30,000 a month now, 14 months later, with her own business. She's got 3 full-time employees, is looking for 2 more, cannot keep up the demand. And it's nothing that came from me. It is her going to her group and them helping her work on her business model. And they're like this, the whole group, all the 7 of them, they're like just so tight. They talk to each other every day, and they hold each other accountable. Accountability is critical.
That to me seems like the nebulous of everything. From every time we've talked about what works about the BrainTrust and how do women help women hit some major milestones. And it seems like just being held accountable, having to show up, having to not bullshit your way through something, and having to defend your where you've got to and what's going on, and get help to work on the business, not just in the business, on a month-by-month basis seems like the magic of it all to me.
Yeah. Well, it's been a joy to be with y'all. I
This
would
has
I'd
been
love
Joy
to
really
see
to have you.
We've loved it.
I'm hoping to get to South Africa. It might be another year, but I would hope to meet all of you.
Brilliant.
We're booking you. If you're coming, Sherry, we're booking you. Don't you worry.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
We're doing everything. Thank you so much.
Thank
It has
you
been
so much.
so